It started out like any other quiet weekend. I was sipping my morning coffee, looking out over my lawn, when something fell off. My garden hose was stretched out across the grass, coiled awkwardly, and dripping water. I hadn't used it the day before. In fact, I hadn't even been outside since Thursday. I walked over to check, thinking maybe an animal knocked it over or the wind pulled it. But the nozzle had clearly been turned, used, and dropped. Someone had been here. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe a kid from the neighborhood needed a quick drink, or someone had an emergency. It happens. But a day later, it happened again. This time, the hose was pulled out even farther, soaking the edge of my flower bed. My water bill had already been higher than usual last month, and now it was making sense. I was paying for someone else's yard work. The next morning, I set my alarm for sunrise. I wanted to see if I could catch whoever was doing it. I sat by the window, coffee in hand again, but this time with a camera ready. Around 7:45, just when the sun was warming the sidewalks, she came walking across the street like she owned the place. Karen, the neighborhood's most notorious HOA member. Always in everyone's business, always enforcing rules she barely followed herself. She didn't knock, didn't wave, just strolled right into my yard, picked up the hose like it belonged to her, and started watering her flower pots across the road. I was stunned. She didn't even glance toward my house. I stepped out calmly and said, "Hey, Karen, that's my hose you're using." She turned around like I'd just asked the dumbest question in the world and smiled. "Oh, I know," she said. "Mine is acting up and yours is closer. I'll just be a minute." Now, I'm not one to start drama. I believe in being neighborly. But something about the way she spoke, like she was doing me a favor by using my hose, rubbed me the wrong way. I told her, politely but firmly, that I'd appreciate it if she asked next time, and maybe didn't use it at all. It was my water bill, after all. She didn't apologize. She just shrugged and said, "It's just water. Don't be dramatic." That's when I knew this wasn't a one-time thing. And I had a feeling that if I didn't nip it now, she'd keep doing it and probably escalate. Later that day, I posted in our HOA community group, asking if anyone else had noticed their hoses being used. A couple of neighbors messaged me privately, saying they'd had similar issues but didn't want to cause trouble. One even told me Karen had walked into their backyard once without knocking. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a hose. It was about respect. And Karen didn't have any. After that strange encounter with Karen, I decided to take a different approach. Clearly, asking nicely didn't work. She wasn't the type to listen unless it somehow affected her. But I still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, one last time. So the next day, I wrote a polite but direct note. I placed it in her mailbox, just a simple message saying, "Please stop using my hose. It's connected to my water supply, and I'm seeing a big increase in my bill. I'd appreciate your understanding." No threats. No complaints. Just facts. You'd think that would be enough. But 2 mornings later, I walked outside and found the hose not only used again, but tossed on the ground like trash. Mud all over it, stretched to the point that it had actually cracked in one spot. She didn't just ignore my message, she made a statement. It felt deliberate. That same afternoon, I caught her walking her tiny dog past my house. I waved her down. "Karen, did you get my note?" She didn't stop walking. "Oh, I saw it," she called out casually. I thought it was kind of petty, to be honest. It's just a hose. I wanted to keep my cool, but it was getting harder. It's not about the hose, I thought. It's about basic courtesy. I didn't say anything back. Just nodded and walked back inside. But in my mind, I was already planning the next move. She had her warning. She had her chance. That night, I checked the hose connection. I tightened the nozzle and checked the water meter before bed. The next morning, more water was gone. She'd used it again, sometime during the early hours. I couldn't even understand how she felt so comfortable walking into someone else's yard, using their stuff like it was public property. This wasn't just entitled behavior, it was invasive. So I called the HOA board. I figured if anyone could stop her, it would be them. I explained the situation, showed them time-stamped photos, even gave them a copy of the note I left. But they weren't much help. Unless you catch her on camera, one board member told me. It's your word against hers. It's not technically a rule violation. That's when it clicked for me. The HOA wouldn't stop her. Notes wouldn't stop her. Even asking face-to-face didn't work. If I wanted this to end, I'd have to think outside the box. Do something that made it crystal clear she couldn't walk all over people. And maybe, just maybe, make her think twice the next time she tried. So I went to the hardware store. I didn't say what I was planning. Just picked up a few parts, paid in cash, and left. Something told me Karen wasn't going to enjoy her next little backyard adventure quite as much as she thought. I spent the next 2 days setting everything up. I wanted it to be just right. It wasn't about revenge. Really, it was about making a point. And if Karen only responded to bold actions, then that's exactly what she was going to get. I had a buddy who worked in plumbing. I gave him a call, ran the idea by him, and he just laughed. "That's genius," he said. "Let me know if you need any help connecting it." I told him I had it covered. But deep down, I appreciated the support. The plan was simple. Karen loved using my hose so much. Fine. I'd give her a hose, one she'd never forget. I disconnected my garden hose from the outdoor faucet and hooked it up to a different source, one she would never expect. I rigged the hose to an old sewage outlet that was still connected to a holding tank on the side of my house. It hadn't been used in years, but with a few tools, some clamps, and a whole lot of duct tape, it was good to go. I tested it once, just to be sure. When I turned the valve, the smell was unbearable. Thick. Rotten. I gagged and had to step back. It worked perfectly. Then I coiled the hose up neatly, just the way Karen liked it, and left it in the same spot on my lawn. And I waited. The next morning came. I sat by the window again, coffee in hand, watching like I had before. Right on schedule, Karen came strolling across the street. She didn't even look around this time. Just walked up, grabbed the hose, and dragged it across the road to her flower pots like she always did. She turned the nozzle. And then chaos. I didn't hear her scream, but I saw the flailing. The way she stumbled back, dropping the hose instantly. The dark, disgusting mess sprayed all over her front walkway. Her face was scrunched in horror, her hands flapping like she was trying to wipe off the smell with air. I could tell she had no idea what hit her. She ran inside, slamming the door behind her. The hose lay in her driveway, still dripping. I stayed inside, said nothing, just kept sipping my coffee, trying not to laugh. She didn't come out for hours. And when she finally did, she avoided my side of the street completely. I don't even think she looked in my direction. Her flowers stayed dry that week. And the next. And the one after that. Whatever thoughts she had about borrowing things that weren't hers, those thoughts changed real fast. By the following weekend, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. I hadn't told anyone what I did. I didn't need to. Karen's reaction said it all. People had seen her rushing out with gloves and a bucket of bleach, furiously scrubbing her front steps like she was trying to erase a crime scene. One neighbor said they saw her gagging in her yard, holding her nose, muttering to herself about disgusting behavior. But the best part? She never mentioned my name. Not once. She couldn't. If she told anyone what happened, she'd have to admit she was sneaking into my yard, using my hose without permission. And she'd never do that. Her pride was too big. Her image as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA was more important than anything. So she kept quiet and stewed in her embarrassment. Meanwhile, I finally got some peace. But it wasn't long before the gossip started picking up speed. Everyone knew Karen had stepped in something, just not what. Rumors spread fast in small neighborhoods. Some said she had a run-in with a skunk. Others claimed she slipped in dog poop. One person even joked that maybe the gardening gods were punishing her for being a control freak. I stayed out of it, just listened, nodded, and acted like I had no idea. Still, there was a shift. I could feel it. Karen wasn't walking around like she used to. She avoided eye contact. She no longer paced the sidewalks with her little notepad, pretending to take notes for violations. It was like her power had been unplugged, and no one missed it. A few days later, I got a message from a neighbor. It was short and simple. "Hey, whatever happened between you and Karen, thank you. That's when I realized how many people she had annoyed over the years. It wasn't just me. She had poked and prodded everyone at some point, sending passive-aggressive letters about trash cans left out too long, complaining about the color of someone's porch paint, even reporting a neighbor for having too many solar lights. But no one ever stood up to her. Until now. And I hadn't even said a word. Ironically, Karen's silence was louder than anything she'd ever shouted across the block. She didn't call a meeting, didn't file a complaint, just vanished into her little bubble, keeping her distance. The hose sat coiled in the corner of my yard for weeks after, untouched. She never came near it again. I thought about putting a little sign next to it, something like "Use at your own risk," but I didn't need to. The lesson had been delivered. And somehow, without a single argument or confrontation, everything started to feel just a little more peaceful around here. About a week after the incident, I noticed something even stranger than Karen's silence. She started being nice. Not just quiet, but actually polite. One morning, she waved at me from across the street. Not her usual fake HOA wave, either. This one was slower, more hesitant, like she wasn't sure what kind of response she'd get. I gave her a small nod and went back to trimming the bushes. A day later, she left a basket on my porch with a note that said, "Sorry for the trouble. Hope this helps with your garden." Inside were a pair of gloves, a few seed packets, and a bottle of plant food. I'll admit, I was surprised. After everything, this was the last thing I expected. Karen, the same woman who treated the neighborhood like her kingdom, was suddenly offering peace offerings? It was so out of character. I had to check the name twice to make sure she actually wrote the note. Still, I didn't trust it completely. Maybe she was trying to save face. Maybe she was hoping a gift would stop the gossip. Or maybe, just maybe, she realized she had finally crossed a line no one would forget. Either way, I accepted the basket, thanked her in passing, and kept a close eye on my hose. The funny part is, her behavior kept changing. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood like a watchdog. No more emails about lawn heights or front door paint. She even showed up at the next HOA meeting and just listened. For once, she wasn't the one running the show or calling people out. She sat in the back, arms folded, nodding quietly. It was like someone had hit a reset button on her entire personality. Around this time, I started chatting more with the neighbors. People I had barely spoken to before now came over, laughed about the whole thing, and shared their own Karen stories. One guy told me how she once left a note on his windshield about excessive pollen on his truck. Another neighbor said Karen told her to tone down the wind chimes because they were too cheerful. It was weirdly comforting to know I wasn't the only one. We all had stories. But now we also had something else, a neighborhood where Karen wasn't in control. People seemed lighter, happier, less tense. And all it took was one gross, unforgettable garden hose moment. From then on, I made sure my hose stayed tightly coiled and out of reach. Not that I thought she'd try again, but still, old habits die hard. I even upgraded to a new hose with a locking nozzle, just in case. Karen never mentioned the sewage again, never even hinted at it. But every time she passed by and gave that tight, polite smile, I knew she hadn't forgotten. And deep down, I think she knew she had finally met her match. One afternoon, a couple of weeks after things had finally settled down, I saw Karen outside tending to her garden. That alone was strange enough. She was always more of the supervisor type, not the hands-in-the-dirt kind. She had a little hat on, a kneeling mat, and was actually pulling weeds. I stood there for a second, just watching. It almost didn't feel real. Karen, working on her own yard, quietly, without barking at anyone. Something had definitely changed. She caught me watching and waved again, that same small wave she'd been practicing lately. This time, she even walked over, slowly, cautiously. "Hey," she said, stopping just short of the property line. "Just wanted to say thanks for being patient. I know I wasn't very neighborly. I didn't really know how to respond to that. After all the trouble, the notes, the trespassing, it was the first time she'd admitted anything." I just nodded. "Appreciate that," I said. "It's important we all respect each other's space, that's all." She gave a soft chuckle, the kind that sounded like she was embarrassed, but trying not to show it. Yeah, I guess I got a little carried away with things. That was putting it lightly. But I didn't push it. It was enough that she was owning up to it, even a little. As odd as it was, I started thinking maybe she really had learned something. Maybe being on the other side of the mess, even just once, gave her a new perspective. After that, Karen kept to herself for the most part. But when she did interact with neighbors, she wasn't overbearing anymore. She asked questions instead of giving orders. She complimented instead of criticized. People still kept a healthy distance, but there wasn't that thick tension in the air anymore. It felt normal. Around that time, I decided to host a small weekend cookout. Just burgers, chips, nothing fancy. I invited a few neighbors, the ones who'd supported me during the whole ordeal. They showed up with coolers, chairs, even a few desserts. We laughed, swapped stories, and talked about how much nicer the street felt lately. To my surprise, Karen showed up too. She didn't stay long, just brought a plate of cookies, said hello to a few folks, and left. But still, the fact that she came at all was a huge shift. A few months ago, she would have been the self-appointed party police, checking for noise or unauthorized decorations. Now, she was trying to be part of it, in her own awkward way. The whole situation reminded me that sometimes the only way people change is when they're forced to feel the discomfort they've been causing others. Karen got a taste of her own medicine. It was messy. It was gross. But it worked. And now, the neighborhood didn't feel like her domain anymore. It felt like a community again. It had been almost 2 months since the hose incident, and life in the neighborhood had taken on a calmer rhythm. People smiled more. Conversations lingered longer on sidewalks. The invisible weight Karen used to carry around like a badge of honor seemed to vanish. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt the shift. Even the HOA newsletter felt less stiff, more community-focused. The language changed. Less rules and reminders, more updates and appreciation. It was subtle, but noticeable. One evening, I was in the backyard finishing up some lawn work when I heard a knock on my side gate. It was Karen again, but this time she looked less nervous and more thoughtful. She held a small envelope in her hand. "Just something for the record," she said, holding it out. Inside was a handwritten note. It wasn't long, just a few lines, thanking me for bringing something important to light, and for helping her reflect on how leadership should look. I don't know if she meant it as a formal apology or just a personal note, but either way, I folded it carefully and kept it. Not because I needed it, but because I never expected it. After she left, I found myself thinking about how bizarre the whole journey had been. How a simple garden hose had triggered a chain of events that reshaped the dynamic of an entire block. What started as a petty annoyance turned into a lesson in boundaries, respect, and silent resistance. And while Karen's presence had softened, the story of what happened didn't just disappear. Newer neighbors would ask me about it with a grin, like they'd heard the legend passed down. "Is it true?" they'd whisper. "Did you really do that to the hose?" I never confirmed it. Just smiled and said, "Let's just say everything's working fine now." People seemed to admire the way it was handled. Not with shouting matches or HOA complaints, but with quiet strategy. It wasn't just about getting back at Karen. It was about showing that there were limits. That people weren't just going to accept disrespect because someone had a clipboard and a title. Funny thing is, even though Karen had clearly changed, I didn't forget how things used to be. The long, passive-aggressive notes. The time she measured a neighbor's lawn with a ruler. The constant sense that someone was always watching. But now those memories were more like stories we could laugh about instead of feel annoyed by. And perhaps the best part was seeing how the rest of the neighbors came together afterward. People started helping each other more. Sharing tools. Trading plants. Checking in just to say hi. For a long time, it felt like we were all just trying to avoid conflict. But now it felt like we were actually becoming a neighborhood again, one where even the most entitled people could learn a thing or two. The morning walks became my new favorite routine, not just because of the fresh air or the quiet, but because of the small things I started to notice. Kids laughing at the end of the street. Neighbors waving from porches. A couple of people chatting near the mailbox without constantly checking over their shoulders. It felt different, better. The tension that had once lived in the shadows of our neighborhood had finally cleared, like a heavy fog lifting after a storm. One day, as I was walking past Karen's house, I noticed something that made me stop. She was painting her fence. Alone. No hired help. No clipboard in sight. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, she smiled and raised her brush. "Trying to keep up with your yard," she joked. I laughed, surprised that we'd come to a place where we could trade friendly jabs instead of silent stares. Maybe we weren't best friends, but we weren't enemies anymore either. Later that afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was my neighbor Mike, holding a box of tools. "Thought you might want these back," he said. "Also, great job with the hose situation." That was legendary. He grinned, and I couldn't help but laugh. Word really had gotten around. But it wasn't just about what I did. It was how it brought everyone a little closer. The strange thing was, even Karen's attitude seemed to ripple through the neighborhood. The new family on the corner said she actually welcomed them with a basket of muffins and a list of nearby grocery stores. It almost didn't sound like her. But maybe people change when they finally realize their behavior affects others more than they think. Or maybe they just need a little push, preferably in the form of a garden hose connected to a sewage tank. As summer rolled on, things stayed peaceful. The lawns were greener, the complaints were fewer, and the HOA meetings turned into potlucks instead of lecture halls. Karen still showed up, but now she brought food instead of rules. At one point, she even laughed at one of her own old complaints someone read aloud from a past email. Everyone chuckled, and she just shook her head, saying, "Yeah, I was really something, wasn't I?" People didn't forget what she used to be like, but they also started to see her as someone capable of change. That made it easier to forgive, or at least move forward. And while nobody gave her a medal, the silence from the neighborhood spoke volumes. Less gossip, more understanding. Less finger-pointing, more shared stories. Even now, every time I glance at that hose in the backyard, I smile a little. It's just a tool, something ordinary. But for a moment, it became something more. A quiet message. A line that said, "This far, no further." And oddly enough, that message helped change everything.